welcome to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. And on tonight's show, immigration legislation in Iowa is challenged by the DOJ. Meanwhile, the U.S. stops an ammunition delivery to Israel over Rafah, and residents in Missouri put abortion on the ballot for 2024. But before we get into our coverage, Samuel Case is taking some time off this week, so filling in for him is Ian Patrick. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Rennie, and it's an honor to be filling in for Sam, but it's even more of an honor to be able to do the show with you, so thank you for letting me fill in for him there.
Of course, anytime. Well, let's start with an update in politics where RNC Chair Michael Whatley is calling on Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene to drop her challenge against Speaker Mike Johnson. Whatley told NBC News, quote, "We need to flip the Senate and we need to expand our majority in the House. We're not going to do that if we're not unified." This comes as Greene has been trying to oust Johnson from his position for his lack of perceived leadership in the House. Whatley added that Republicans need to be on the same page as they move forward in the upcoming election. In a similar case, Chair of the House Freedom Caucus, Representative Bob Good, said that Greene isn't acting in the best interest of Donald Trump, and he called Greene's actions selfish.
Always seems to be something going on in Congress over there, but meanwhile, why don't we go to a new update emerging in the classified documents case against former President Donald Trump, where Special Counsel Jack Smith and his prosecution team admitted that some of its key evidence was actually altered and/or manipulated. The admission comes from a new Friday filing to U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon. That filing said the scanned documents used in their evidence in the court were in a different order than the physical copies that were seized by the FBI. According to their filing, quote, "There are some boxes where the order of items within that box is not the same as in the associated scans." Smith's team additionally admitted that they actually misled the court about this problem, saying the documents were in the exact state that they were seized. Now, some legal experts believe that all of this, especially that last part there, could prove to be problematic for the overall case against Trump, as it essentially amounts to admission of evidence tampering. Smith's team continuously downplayed the revelation by trying to explain their way out, even suggesting that smaller items like books and index cards could have shifted around during movement and therefore moved some of the evidence.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration is shutting down a controversial national security experts group less than a year after it started. The Department of Homeland Security agreed to permanently disband the panel after a lawsuit alleged it stacked the committee with Biden administration allies. President of America First Legal Stephen Miller says the panel would have been used to promote censored, unethical spying and gross civil rights invasions. It contains Hunter Biden laptop deniers like John Brennan, James Clapper, and Paul Colby. All use their former intelligence credentials to declare the laptop story as Russian disinformation ahead of the 2020 elections. A fourth member, Tashina Gahar, drafted the FISA application used to spy on Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. And a lawsuit notes that 98% of all political donations made by the panel members went to Democrat candidates. The panel will end in early June.
In some other news regarding the government, a new whistleblower accusation suggests that senior military leaders were planning to disobey former President Trump's orders on January 6th of 2021. This accusation comes from Colonel Earl Matthews, who did an interview with the Daily Mail on May 3rd. Matthews also previously spoke with the House Subcommittee, which is currently reviewing the January 6th Select Committee. Here he is.
I'm here today because two senior general officers of the United States Army, General Charles A. Flynn and Lieutenant General Walter E. Pyatt, have acted contrary to those values. Generals Pyatt and Flynn have lied to Congress, to federal investigators, and to the American people about why it took so long for the District of Columbia National Guard to deploy to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Their distortions contributed to a deeply and fundamentally flawed Department of Defense Inspector General investigation and to deficiencies in other official inquiries.
Now, he has similar things to say in this most recent interview, just against different individuals. This time, Matthews says that Trump administration members Mark Milley and Ryan McCarthy had planned to disobey any orders which would have been handed down by Trump. He says they unreasonably assumed that Trump would try and use the D.C. National Guard to stop the certification of the 2020 presidential election. For that reason, Matthews says the senior military leadership surreptitiously curtailed Trump's control over both the National Guard and the U.S. Army. Ironically, his remarks seem to coincide with a book from 2021, which also claims that Milley and other military leaders had made similar plans to disobey orders from Trump.
Meanwhile, the Department of Justice is threatening to sue Iowa over the state's immigration laws. The DOJ is giving Iowa until May 7th to halt their new Senate bill aimed at curbing the flow of illegal immigrants. More specifically, the law gives authority to state and local law enforcement to arrest illegal immigrants who have been previously deported or banned from entering the U.S. In response to the DOJ's threat, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds says the state is only doing this because the Biden administration refuses to enforce the laws already on the books. Meanwhile, the DOJ argues that the state law violates the Immigration and Nationality Act and intrudes into a field that is occupied by the government and is preempted. Iowa follows Texas with its new legislation, but they are not the only ones. Arizona Republicans want to pass similar legislation to protect their own borders as well.
And finally, Republicans are also criticizing the Biden administration for giving free health care to thousands of Deferred Action for Child Arrivals recipients, otherwise known as DACA recipients. The Biden administration finalized a rule on Friday that essentially redefines what it means to be lawfully present in the U.S. As such, it will now give taxpayer-funded health care through Obama exchanges to more than 100,000 Dreamers who illegally arrived in the U.S. when they were 16 or younger. That decision sparked immediate backlash from the likes of Senator Josh Hawley, who told the Daily Caller that it puts working Americans last while incentivizing illegal immigration. It also comes at a time when the national debt has actually topped $34 trillion, and while inflation is crushing the middle class. Senator J.D. Vance also called it a slap in the face to hardworking Americans. The new rule has renewed a push for the No Obamacare for Illegal Aliens Act, which was stalled since its introduction back in July. And up next, we look at updates to the American campus protests against the war in Gaza and other news when we get back from this break.
For $28, you can sponsor an ultrasound scan that will enable an abortion-minded woman to hear the heartbeat of her baby. 90% of the time when this happens, that sound will change a woman's mind and cause her to keep the baby. And guess what? An anonymous donor is matching your gift. For every 200 scans underwritten, an ultrasound machine will be purchased and placed in a life-saving preborn clinic. Go to preborn.com/FISM to give today. That's preborn.com/FISM.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
Did you know that you can always listen and watch Financial Issues online? Just go to financialissues.org/live or download the FISM TV app in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. We stream our show every weekday morning starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. If you're looking for a biblical take on investing and current events and how it relates to the money that God has given you, then you don't want to miss Financial Issues.
Welcome back to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. Let's continue our coverage with some updates on the American college protests. As I said before the break there, even as graduation season arrives, the demonstrations don't look like they're going to be subsiding anytime soon. And this is best reflected at the University of Michigan. Holding its commencement on Saturday, the university prepared ahead of time for any disruptions by having police officers stationed nearby. As a matter of fact, some students did shout over each other and wave Palestinian flags during the 2-hour event, but most of these protests were away from the stage itself. It was, however, disruptive enough that it prompted one speaker to refocus attention at least a few times. Northeastern University also saw these demonstrations, albeit to a less egregious degree. Holding its commencement at Fenway Park on Sunday, demonstrations at Northeastern were rather mild. In fact, the only notable point was when an undergraduate speaker at the event called for peace in Gaza during her speech, and the crowd generally agreed with her. But light as this display was, it reflects what could be a worrying trend as graduation season continues.
And still here covering some of the college protests, it looks like both USC and UCLA are getting a grip on the riots that have gotten out of hand this past week. Yesterday, law enforcement at the University of Southern California told unlawful encampment members that they would be arrested if they didn't leave their posts. People were then seen leaving the premises as police started forming a line to remove them. Relative peace set in afterwards as attention shifted towards the ongoing protests at the other California university, UCLA. In response to the chaos there, UCLA quickly created a new chief safety officer position to monitor campus safety. The school chose former Sacramento Police Chief Rick Brazil to oversee the Office of Campus Safety and to prevent future incidents. Now, this comes as Columbia University has already canceled its commencement ceremony in the wake of anti-Israel protests at the school.
And speaking of the war in Gaza and of Israel, actually, the nation is vocalizing its frustration with the U.S. after it put a hold on a new shipment of ammunition. This marks the first weapons shipment for Israel that was stopped or delayed since the October 7th attack from Hamas. The abrupt cancellation of this weapons shipment was not explained by any U.S. officials, but President Biden has been increasingly critical of Israel's planned ground offensive in Rafah, especially as he continues to face pressure at home, such as in the form of these college campus protests. But despite the move, Israel is set on its plan to go into Rafah and to fully eliminate Hamas as part of its goal. During a speech on Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu affirmed that Israel will stand alone if they must.
I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. But we know we're not alone because countless decent people around the world support our just cause. And I say to you, we will defeat our genocidal enemies. Never again is now.
Meanwhile, 3 Israeli soldiers lost their lives in a Hamas-led rocket attack at the Rafah crossing yesterday. The Israeli military said there were 10 rockets fired from Rafah into southern Gaza at the Kerem Shalom crossing. Israel immediately shut down 8 trucks going into that area, and in response to the attack, Israel carried out an airstrike in Rafah that killed 3 people and wounded several others, according to Reuters. Now, Israel said they struck the area where Hamas launched the rockets, including a nearby military structure. The IDF said the attack is further proof that Hamas exploits humanitarian facilities and spaces and uses Gaza civilians as human shields. At the same time, yesterday's attack may put a damper on the ongoing ceasefire negotiations as well.
And amidst all of that, the Israeli office of a Gaza news agency is now shuttered in Israel following the government's decision to block broadcasts while the war continues. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced yesterday that his cabinet unanimously voted to close local operations of the Qatari-owned Al Jazeera. Officials branded the news agency as the, quote, mouthpiece of Hamas. The announcement ends broadcasts within the nation, but does not prevent Israelis from accessing videos that have been posted to Facebook. But this does mark the first time that Israel has taken action against a foreign news outlet since the beginning of the October 7th attack. The ban can be renewed in 45-day increments as well. The media company rejected that it is a threat to Israeli national security, while critics called it an attack on the free press. A civil rights group is already challenging the decision and has even asked the Israeli Supreme Court to temporarily overturn the ban. But meanwhile, the head of the Israeli outlet is accusing the government of wanting to silence other viewpoints.
This is very dangerous decision against Al Jazeera. It's clear that they want to prevent from any others to know what is happening in this war in Gaza, inside Israel, in the West Bank.
Meanwhile, Russia announces tactical nuclear weapon drills, citing provocative statements from the West. It's the first time Moscow has announced exercises involving the weapons, which have a smaller payload than intercontinental missiles. They are theoretically meant for short-range combat, but can still rival the size of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The Russian Defense Ministry says the drills are in response to provocative statements and threats by individual Western officials. However, Moscow has not set an official start date. The announcement followed news that the UK's foreign minister gave Ukraine the green light to use British-made weapons against Russian territory. It also comes after Russia added Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to its list of most wanted criminals on Saturday. The Interior Ministry did not specify those charges. And up next, we have more coverage coming up after this break. But first, let's go to FISM Seth Yudinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Yudinsky. Well, historians like myself love to enter into the what-if zone of study. And although it's not always beneficial for academia and learning, I can tell you from experience it is delightful. Let's embark on such a query in this episode as we explore the shadowy history of one of the most important physical pieces of history from the biblical age. Now, this item was of utmost importance in the story of Israel, and it housed the very tablets that God himself inscribed the Ten Commandments to Moses at Mount Sinai. It has since been lost to history, though, so let's consider the following question. Where is the Ark of the Covenant? Here's what we know. The Ark of the Covenant was probably the most important holy object in Israel's history. It traveled with the Israelites on their journey to the Promised Land and was housed in the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctuary of the temple, where God himself would be present with the priests on the Day of Atonement, and upon completion of the sacrificial ritual, would grant forgiveness of sins to his people. Now, its last known resting place was Solomon's Temple as the crown jewel of the Davidic dynasty. But in the early 6th century BC, the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem and the Ark was lost. So there begins our question, where is the Ark and what happened to it? The answer, sadly, is that we do not know. However, there are several possibilities we need to consider. The first and perhaps most likely is that the Babylonians destroyed it when they ransacked the Israelite capital. We're not told in the later history books in the Old Testament the Ark's fate, which has left some to speculate that it must have been destroyed in the Babylonian siege. There is, however, ample evidence that the Ark could have survived the 586 BC siege of Jerusalem. Many believe some quick-thinking Jews hid the Ark in the caverns below the Temple Mount before the Babylonians could destroy it, leading to further hypotheses. Now, one of these is that the Ark was either taken or destroyed during the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans later in AD 70. Some believe, though, the Ark survived the pagan era and passed to Christian hands in the 4th century and then into Muslim hands in the 7th. Now, there are others who believe the Ark, upon the Christian recapture of Jerusalem during the First Crusade, then fell back into Christian hands and became the property of the Knights Templar, who made their headquarters at the original site of Solomon's Temple in the Old City. The Templars, secretive in their practices and reach, became exceedingly rich almost overnight, and many believe it was because they discovered and claimed ancient treasures, among which was the Ark of the Covenant, hidden in the tunnels below the temple. Now, if the Templars did indeed possess the Ark, it could have ended up anywhere. Perhaps it made its way to Western Europe after the Crusades, or perhaps it's still hidden under the Temple Mount to this day. And by the way, that's the present site of Islam's Dome of the Rock. Perhaps the Muslims destroyed it, or perhaps the Templars, upon their destruction in the 14th century, smuggled it away to a hidden place. Some believe that place could be a 15th century church in Scotland that could have been a Templar refuge, or even the infamous money pit of Oak Island off the eastern coast of Canada. Well, there's no solid answer this side of eternity, still a mystery, but fun to speculate nonetheless. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Many mothers find strength in the experience of giving birth as they overcome physical challenges and embrace the journey of bringing a new life into the world. You can help an abortion-minded mother receive discipleship, encouragement, and the strength needed to have her baby. During the month of May, you can bless your mom for Mother's Day by giving to Preborn on your mother's behalf. Go to preborn.com/FISM to give. That's preborn.com/FISM.
When it comes to money, I always have so many questions. I never know where to go to get answers to those questions. They never really teach you this stuff in school, like some of the best ways to handle it, how to save, when to invest, where to invest, even just what to do with the money. And if I put it in the stock market, what's the best way to protect from losing it all? That fear can be paralyzing. You don't really know what decisions to make. As a Christian, I don't want to give my money to people who are going to use it for things that God hates. When I discovered financial issues, it was like a burden was lifted off my shoulders. Not only did I gain access to a simple investment strategy that I can manage myself, I also have the peace of mind that my money will not be going to companies that actively promote things that God hates. Financial issues has allowed me to experience peace in my investments.
Invest your money in a God-honoring way. Go to financialissues.org.
When a woman experiences an unplanned pregnancy, she's faced with a difficult decision. Preborn connects with life-affirming pregnancy clinics across the nation and provides them with free ultrasound sessions for expectant mothers. When a mother sees her baby on an ultrasound and hears their heartbeat, it doubles the chance she'll choose life. Visit preborn.com/life to save a baby's life.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's continue with some national coverage here. In a rather disturbing turn of events, a vehicle crashed into the outer gate of the White House late Saturday evening. The Secret Service said the driver was found dead on the scene, but there were no threats to the president. The D.C. Police Department said the driver was an adult male, but it remains unclear if the driver died as a direct result of the impact. The Washington Metropolitan Police and the Secret Service are currently investigating the situation.
Certainly a scary situation and one that we'll continue to follow, but let's move now to some more local news, starting in Massachusetts, where hundreds of demonstrators came out in protest against a new law. The law in question is the state's Right to Shelter law, which contains a new 9-month limit for families living in state emergency shelters. The law also approved a $426 million boost into the shelter system from Massachusetts savings. Governor Maura Healey signed the law on Tuesday, but some Bostonians weren't a fan of the law's provisions. In fact, some argue that it will encourage illegal immigrants to live in their state while leaving homeless veterans and other residents behind. This was expressed by Jeff Cooner, a conservative talk show host in attendance at the rally, who spoke with local ABC affiliate WCVB5.
I think now what you're seeing with inflation, you're seeing now that all of these scarce resources are being used, say, to house, shelter, feed illegals, while so many Americans are struggling to get by. People are saying enough is enough.
Others in attendance at the rally argued for more effort from the federal government on the issue of immigration and the border as a whole.
And meanwhile, Texas is tragically experiencing what may be the largest opioid overdose outbreak in recent times. The surge of fentanyl-linked calls began last Monday.
Austin Travis County EMS has responded to over 51 suspected overdoses. Many of those were found in cardiac arrest, and unfortunately, out of those 51, 4 resulted in being pronounced deceased.
By the end of 3 days, those numbers climbed to 75 suspected overdoses with at least 9 deaths. That far outpaces the city's usual average of 100 overdoses a month. Emergency responders distributed 400 doses of Narcan through affected areas, which are credited with saving dozens of lives. The state allows fentanyl poisoning to be prosecuted as murder. Now, police have detained 2 people who may have played a role in the bad batch of drugs. Meanwhile, Austin sees the most drug use and per capita overdoses of any Texas city following their decision to defund the police in 2020. Last year, officials said they seized 500,000 lethal doses of fentanyl in the city.
And while we're in the state of Texas, the eastern part of that state is also in crisis after nearly 2 feet of rainfall this week triggered mass flooding, leaving 1 dead and hundreds of others stranded. And tragically, a child did die early this morning after his family's car was caught by floodwater, and we ask that you would keep that family in your prayers. More than 400 others have been rescued from their homes, roads, and rooftops from the floods, and the daily rains this past week swelled river systems and oversaturated the ground. But flooding accelerated when the Lake Livingston area topped 23 inches of rain, rushing water over the top of the dam. Houston and Fort Worth areas experienced the worst flooding. Houston area meteorologist Jeff Lindner said yesterday that things are improving slowly and that river levels are being seen to going down.
Meanwhile, in Missouri, a new abortion legislation received enough signatures to make it on the ballot this year. The proposed amendment would enshrine abortion access into the state's constitution. Missourians for Constitutional Freedom led the effort and collected over 380,000 signatures from registered voters. The number surpassed a required number by roughly 172,000 signatures. Now, if the amendment goes into effect, abortions would be legal up until 24 weeks of pregnancy, with exceptions after for the mother's life and health. According to NBC News, the proposal also seems to block any denial, interference, delay, or restriction of the procedures. Currently, Missouri has one of the strictest anti-abortion laws in the nation, and should the amendment pass, it would effectively undo that ban. And speaking of the fight for life, we would like to remind you to come alongside and support Preborn this month of May. They're looking to provide 100 ultrasounds to pregnancy centers across the nation. For as little as $28, you can provide an ultrasound scan. As part of a donor match for this campaign, for every 200 scans, Preborn will be gifted an ultrasound machine to provide to these centers. Not only that, but the Preborn team also shares the gospel with abortion-minded mothers. And to learn more about this, you can go to preborn.com/FISM. That's preborn.com/FISM.
That's right, and we'll be continuing to promote Preborn during this entire month as they run their campaign. So we encourage you to go alongside them, as Rennie said, in their efforts. And now to end our show today, we look at the result of Saturday's Kentucky Derby. The 150th Run for the Roses at Churchill Downs ended in a remarkable photo finish worthy of the event. Among 3 horses that crossed the finish line simultaneously, the winner was declared to be a horse or a racer by the name of Mystic Dan in a stunning upset. In fact, this marked only the 10th time that a Derby winner won by such a short stretch, the last of which having occurred over 28 races ago. Second place, meanwhile, was awarded to a horse by the name of Sierra Leone, and third place was awarded to Forever Young. There was another horse by the name of Fierceness who was favored to win the race fairly heavily, but fell far behind to end at number 15 despite an early lead. Then this year's Derby held a purse which actually stood at $5 million as well, which is the highest amount yet and well above the $3 million offered in 2019.
And that certainly sounded like a really fun event to attend, and congratulations to the winner. Well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content. And for any updates until our next show, follow us on social media at FISM News or download the FISM app on your smartphone. Thank you so much. God bless. I'll see you next time.